Karoline Leavitt walked into the heart of America's most secure building, but nothing could have prepared her, or anyone else, for what she saw next. The moment she stepped into Secret Service headquarters, jaws dropped. Eyes widened. You could feel the tension thick in the air. Something was very wrong, and Karoline was about to uncover a truth that would shake the room to its core. But before we dive into this jaw-dropping moment, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, letting us know where in the world you're tuning in from. Trust us, you're not going to believe what happens next. Let's get started with the routine visit that turned into a whispered warning. It began like any other morning in Washington. The sky wore its usual overcast veil, and the wind rustled the bare trees along Constitution Avenue as if whispering secrets only DC insiders could hear. The city buzzed, but the street outside Secret Service headquarters stood strangely still, quiet as a prayer. Karoline Leavitt stepped out of her black SUV, coffee cup in hand, briefcase snug beneath her arm. She looked like the picture of calm, collected authority, pearl-studded earrings, neatly pressed blazer, and a soft gold cross just peeking through the lapel of her coat. But something felt off. The sidewalk was empty. No staffers scrolling their phones, no low-ranking agents sneaking cigarette breaks. The silence was suffocating. Still, Karoline brushed the feeling aside. She'd been here dozens of times. Routine security updates, standard protocol, nothing she hadn't handled before. She swiped her ID at the steel entrance and nodded to the guards behind the bulletproof glass. One nodded back with an odd stiffness, his eyes darting to the security camera above them. The other avoided her gaze entirely. As the metal doors slid open with a whispering shh, Karoline felt a chill, not from the air conditioning, but from something deeper, something instinctual, something ancient. She stepped into the lobby where time seemed to stop. The floors gleamed too perfectly. The flags hung too straight. The people, though few, moved with a rigidity that reminded her of chess pieces in mid-game. A receptionist greeted her in hushed tones, barely making eye contact. "Ms. Leavitt, please follow Agent Rowe to conference room 14. You're scheduled for biometric re-verification." Biometric re-verification? That was unusual. Still, she followed without hesitation, heels clicking against polished marble, each step echoing louder than the last. Agent Rowe, tall and stiff as an obelisk, said nothing as he led her down the hallway. That's when she noticed it. Doors half cracked, conversations halting as she passed, whispers cutting off like threads snipped by invisible scissors. At the far end of the corridor, room 14 stood slightly ajar. The lights inside were low, casting long shadows across the carpet. No windows, no wall art, no coffee machine, just a single table, a single chair, and a silence that screamed. Rowe didn't enter with her. He placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, an unusual gesture for a federal agent, and then shut the door behind her. Karoline stood alone in the room. She set her coffee down, adjusted her blazer, and waited. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked, and the door opened. The man who walked through the door was a ghost. Karoline knew him the second she saw him, though she hadn't spoken his name in years. Agent Nathaniel Cole, once a legend in the intelligence community, a man credited with exposing deep-cover terror cells and thwarting the largest foreign infiltration attempt since the Cold War. He was the kind of name that made headlines and inspired documentaries. Then, he vanished. 5 years ago, during a covert operation overseas, Cole was declared missing in action, presumed dead. A folded flag was given to his family. A black and white photo sat framed in the Hall of Honor. And yet here he stood, tall, lean, eyes hard as stone, alive. Karoline's jaw tightened as she stood. "Agent Cole?" she asked, her voice somewhere between awe and alarm. He shook his head slowly. "I go by Daniel Hart now." A silence settled between them like a curtain. Then he walked to the table and pulled something from his coat. A small black flash drive. He slid it across the table with one calloused hand. "You've built your career confronting corruption. I've watched, and I've waited." Karoline didn't move. "What is this?" "Proof. Evidence. A cancer in our system." He leaned in closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's real, Karoline, and it's moving faster than anyone realizes. You need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Karoline glanced at the flash drive. Her instincts screamed caution, but her conscience? It leaned forward, demanding more. Start talking, she said, folding her arms. Cole exhaled, as if lifting a 1,000-pound weight off his chest. This isn't politics. This isn't partisan. What's happening now is a systematic compromise of national security. From the inside, he paused. And it's not just bureaucrats or lobbyists. It's officials, trusted names, directors, senators, advisors, people who hold the pen when policies are written, who shake hands at NATO summits, who attend funeral services at Arlington. Karoline felt her blood run cold. They're working with foreign interests? She asked. He nodded. Not just working with them, they're embedded by them. These aren't ideologues. They're opportunists. They're after control of resources, policy, surveillance networks. They've already compromised systems that keep this country safe. He looked around the room as if the walls had ears. You weren't supposed to be in this room, Karoline. You weren't even on their radar until now. Karoline frowned. Why now? Cole met her gaze, and for a flicker of a moment, something vulnerable passed across his hardened face. Because you're clean. Because your record terrifies them. Because you speak directly to the American people. And worse, they believe you. He tapped the flash drive. What's on that drive is dangerous. If it gets into the wrong hands, you'll be discredited, silenced, or worse. But if you play this right, if you're smart, this could expose one of the most dangerous covert operations ever sanctioned on American soil. Karoline reached forward slowly and picked up the drive. It felt light, insignificant, but she knew better. It was the weight of truth, the kind of truth that doesn't just shake the system, but fractures it. Her voice, when she spoke again, was low but resolute. What do you need from me? Cole looked her dead in the eye. Everything. Then, Karoline Leavitt hadn't slept in 3 days. The flash drive Agent Cole, now Daniel Hart, had passed to her, had detonated everything she thought she knew about the inner workings of American power. She sat in her apartment office, curtains drawn tight, coffee gone cold. Her blazer lay draped over the arm of a chair, and the glow of her laptop lit the determined lines of her face. In front of her, 3 spiral-bound notebooks filled with scribbled notes, arrows, diagrams. It looked like the wall of a detective obsessed. And she was. The contents of that drive weren't just concerning. They were catastrophic. Dozens of files, hundreds of connections, shell companies in Qatar and Malta, intelligence officials who had mysteriously retired early, millions in transfers routed through obscure accounts in Belize, policy documents that looked like standard memos until cross-referenced with military budget revisions and cyber network reassignments. And the most damning detail of all, the same 5 names kept showing up. Not low-level players, but power brokers. Men and women sitting on Homeland Security subcommittees, policy advisors to the Joint Chiefs. One a respected ambassador, another a retired general turned cable news darling. The plot wasn't just about sowing chaos. It was about restructuring America from within, quietly, surgically, irreversibly. Karoline's hands trembled as she flipped to another document titled Phase 4, Structural Reallocation. In plain English, it described cutting funding from veteran support programs and reallocating them under international intelligence oversight. She read it again, then a third time. The implications weren't abstract. They were personal. Her grandfather had stormed the beaches of Normandy. Her father served in Vietnam. Her own town had lost 3 young men in Afghanistan. And now their sacrifices were being stripped away in the name of something cold and global and treasonous. She needed help, not from a campaign advisor, not from a media handler. She needed someone with war in his bones, someone who knew the difference between policy and patriotism. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 2 years. Leavitt? The voice on the other end answered, gravelly, tired, but still fierce. Senator Vaughn, she said, I need to see you, in person. Harold Vaughn's home wasn't in D.C. It was in a quiet patch of Virginia farmland where the hills rolled gently and the air carried the scent of pine and old leather. His porch creaked as he stood to greet her. The man was 88 years old, a veteran of World War II, a constitutional conservative with hands thick from farm work and eyes that had seen the inside of too many war rooms. "Didn't think I'd be putting on the old boots again," he said as he poured her coffee. Karoline laid the documents out across the table. Vaughn read in silence. For an hour, then another. When he finally looked up, his hands were shaking. "This," he whispered, "this is older than you know." "What do you mean?" He sat back, eyes clouded, not with age but with memory. "I saw hints of this during my second term. Quiet meetings, foreign advisors asking questions they shouldn't, but I was dismissed. Old man paranoia, they called it." He pointed to a name on the documents. Samuel Cray, the retired general. Cray ran Black Ops in South America during the 80s. That man doesn't blink unless he's paid to. Karoline closed her laptop. Then we bring it into the light. The next 48 hours were war room precision. Karoline and Vaughn mapped a strategy. Leak select files to trusted journalists, not to the mainstream outlets, but to veteran-run media, constitutional forums, and independent national security channels. Contact 2 sitting senators known for their record of integrity, one from West Virginia, the other from Wyoming. Trigger a congressional inquiry by filing a formal request under emergency whistleblower protections. But most of all, involve the people. If Americans knew what was happening, Vaughn said, they wouldn't stand for it, especially not the ones who've served. Karoline nodded. Then we give them the truth. They called it the Whitestone Protocol, a phrase buried in one of the encrypted files, hidden in a subfolder marked Community Alignment. It sounded innocuous until they decrypted it. The Whitestone Protocol was the final stage, a full reset of domestic defense oversight, consolidating key national security functions under a new non-governmental advisory group backed by multinational donors. Translation: a coup in slow motion. And the date? 19 days from now. Karoline's stomach dropped. Every detail confirmed it. The budget shifts, the security contract expirations, the silent reassignment of cyber intel agents. If the Whitestone Protocol succeeded, it wouldn't be a bomb in Times Square. It would be the quiet erasure of sovereignty. Things began unraveling fast. On the 4th day, one of Karoline's anonymous sources, an analyst from NSA, stopped returning calls. Day 5, a friend in the FBI was suspended without explanation. Day 6, she received a phone call. No name, no number. "Stop digging. You're about to bury more than your career." Karoline didn't flinch. Day 7, her mother, retired teacher and grandmother of 5, received a letter from the IRS alleging unpaid taxes from 2011. It was bogus. Day 8, her father, who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, noticed he was being followed leaving his church. But Karoline? She didn't break. She doubled down. On the 9th day, she called a town hall, not in D.C., but in Topeka, Kansas, America's heartland. The invitation list was short: veterans, clergy, Gold Star families, retired judges, and constitutional scholars. And it was broadcast live. She stood at the podium, no teleprompter, no makeup, just her. Her voice was soft at first. "They're counting on our silence." She paused, looked into the crowd, into the cameras. "But I'm done whispering." A murmur rose through the room, then clapping, then shouting. "We stand with you, Karoline." And then they stood. Wheelchairs creaked, canes lifted. One man rose with 2 prosthetic legs and held up his Navy cross. A woman held a Bible in one hand, her husband's folded flag in the other. An elderly black pastor stood and shouted, "Let truth march again." Outside, the crowd spilled into the streets. Candles were lit, hymns were sung. The movement had a pulse, and it wasn't going away. The sun rose like fire over the Capitol, burning through the early fog as if determined to pierce the veil of deceit that had darkened the nation for too long. On this day, the marble buildings of Washington didn't feel like monuments. They felt like battlegrounds. And Karoline Leavitt, once just a name on a congressional roster, was now the storm at the gates. She walked up the stone steps of the press hall, Not with hesitation, not with arrogance, but with conviction. The kind of quiet, unshakable courage passed down through generations of Americans who had endured war, loss, and the long road of redemption. Dressed in navy blue, hair pulled back, her face bare of makeup, she carried no talking points, no teleprompter, only the truth, in a small gold cross that hung just below her collarbone. Inside the press room, the tension was electric. Journalists from around the world had gathered. Some whispered, others shuffled nervously, but all eyes locked on Karoline as she stepped to the microphone. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This," she said, holding it up, "contains names, transactions, meetings, and classified memos. Evidence of a plot to destabilize our republic from within." The murmurs began instantly. "These files implicate members of intelligence, Congress, international financiers, and foreign agents. And I'm not going to read from a prepared statement today. I'm simply going to do what no one in power has done so far: trust the American people with the truth." With that, she turned and plugged the drive into the podium's terminal. Live on every major network, every feed on YouTube and Twitter, the documents went public. But Karoline wasn't done. "In case any media outlet decides to redact or bury this story," she said sharply, "we've already released encrypted copies to thousands of independent veteran networks, military family coalitions, and faith-based groups across all 50 states. You don't get to erase the truth anymore. We're not asking permission to see it." Then she stepped back from the podium and walked out. The fallout was instant and seismic. Within hours, hashtags like "Warner Whitestone exposed," "We stand with Karoline," and "Democracy under siege" trended globally. Screens lit up with the contents of the files, exposing shell accounts in Dubai, forged memos on cybersecurity transfers, and internal emails referring to operations as soft resets of constitutional structure. News anchors stammered. Intelligence officials denied. But denials no longer mattered. The people had seen the proof. Judge committees were convened within 48 hours. The Senate chamber, once gridlocked by partisanship, was filled with the stunned silence of those who had just been caught red-handed or had remained complicit in their silence. Even the president addressed the nation that night. His speech was solemn and short. "We failed. The people didn't." Karoline was nowhere near the Capitol when the speech aired. She was in a chapel in Ohio, sitting in the front pew. Beside her, a folded flag rested in a widow's trembling hands. They were burying Michael Tanner, a whistleblower whose name appeared in File 026B, marked "terminated during questioning." He was 32, a father of two, a data analyst with a conscience. He had given Karoline the final decryption key, and for that, he was silenced. Karoline stood at the podium, her eyes glassy but focused. She looked out at a room filled with Marines in dress blues, elderly veterans wearing medals, and a group of teens holding handmade signs that read, "Truth matters." "This fight," she began softly, "was never about one woman with a microphone. It was about them, the men and women who risked their lives, who buried their friends, who defended this nation and came home to a system that stopped defending them." She reached up and touched the cross around her neck. "This belonged to my grandfather. He wore it in Korea. He gave it to me the day I got elected. He said, 'Karoline, it's not just a cross. It's a reminder that freedom has a cost and that silence is the enemy's favorite weapon. I've worn it ever since." A pause. "And I won't take it off." The chapel erupted in applause, not the kind you hear at a campaign rally, the kind that shakes the dust from hymnals and rattles the stained glass windows with righteous thunder. Over the next 3 months, the world watched as dominoes fell. 18 federal officials were arrested. 2 former intelligence directors resigned. 6 members of Congress were indicted for treason and foreign collusion. Over $1.4 billion in offshore assets were frozen. The Whitestone Protocol was formally outlawed through an emergency constitutional amendment. National security laws were rewritten. Whistleblower protections were expanded. Veterans' benefits were restored, fully funded with retroactive compensation for the years of systemic theft. And Karoline? She was offered a seat before the International Tribunal on Democratic Integrity, the kind of historic testimony that would be broadcast across the world stage. But she declined. When a reporter asked why, she answered with only 5 words. "I already testified, with my life." And the letters flooded in. Thousands. A 74-year-old man from Nebraska wrote, "I watched Watergate unfold on a black and white TV, but I've never seen something this raw, this honest, this brave." A 90-year-old World War II widow sent her husband's campaign ribbon and a handwritten note. "He fought in France. He would have stood for you. So today I stand in his place." A rabbi from Brooklyn, a Baptist pastor from Alabama, and an imam from Detroit co-signed a letter. "You did more than expose corruption. You reminded us all that truth transcends party, creed, and fear." And the last, Karoline stood one last time beneath the American flag. Not on a government stage, but on the front lawn of a small-town VFW post in New Hampshire. Behind her were veterans in folding chairs. Beside her, faith leaders from every tradition. In her hand, the same flash drive. But this time, it was encased in glass, a symbol of what transparency should always look like. Her voice was steady. "The future doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the courageous, to those who kneel only to pray and rise for truth." And in homes across America, in nursing homes, in church halls, at kitchen tables, the message echoed. Justice was no longer theoretical. It had a name, a cross, and a story that would never be silenced.